Welcome to The Last Call. It's a conversation between two boozy hacks. I'm John Sweeney in London, and in New York is Michael Weiss. We're talking about Trumpageddon, about what's going to happen in a few days' time, and to drown our sorrows that are now and our sorrows to come. I'm drinking from a bottle of Primo, bit of advertising here, Antica Marina, which is rather nice, I have to say. And what are you up to? What are you drinking?
I still got my Japanese Roku gin, and because I technically do not identify as a millennial, but according to certain demographic studies, I may well be included in that dire category. I've got my LaCroix, which, even though this came out, I think, in the 1980s, is the non-boozy drink of choice for people with podcasts in Brooklyn who graduated college, I think, after the withdrawal from Iraq. So I'm learning to embrace my youth, even as I have a Gadarene leap into my 40s at the moment. So,
yeah.
By the way, not just Trumpageddon today, my friend. It's Jezzageddon or Corbynageddon.
Oh yeah.
I did not see that one coming, as they say. No. So tell me from your end, because I'm less very online than I used to be, and I don't follow these things as closely. So I saw his Facebook post, and I think I've identified the problematic paragraph in it, but tell me what the reporting has been like from the UK.
Well, the sense of it is simple, is that finally the government body created by a Labour government to hold bodies to account that may be institutionally racist, reports upon the Labour Party and
Right.
says that there was too much anti-Semitism, and the safeguards and the checks and balances weren't working properly. There wasn't a good process, and so the line has got to be, we're terribly sorry, and we won't do this again. And what Corbyn goes in and says, terribly sorry if anyone was upset, but this was overstated.
Yeah.
And the moment he says that, that's a problem, because what he's saying is, yeah, it's a problem, but actually it was exaggerated. It's not that big a problem, folks.
And it was the enemies within and without, and the media.
Yeah. And so what he's not doing yet again is addressing the core problem. And I did some reporting for this for Newsnight when I was there, and I went to Chesterfield, and there was one guy who was still in the Labour Party, who had posted or sort of reposted, copied, whatever it is, I think in Facebook, with some absolutely ghastly kind of Die Stürmer stuff, hook-nosed Jews and blood and dollars. And the guy was still in the Labour Party. And when and he was there at a Chris Williamson event. Chris Williamson was a Labour MP who was very much a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn and his line on all this stuff. And when I chased this guy, he went and hid in the toilet and claimed he had a bladder complaint. And it's kind of, if you're a TV reporter, there are certain places you can't go, and one is in the gents with the TV camera.
The Jews have made me incontinent is one that I've been long waiting for. I guess
we're all having a sip. So, but it struck me that this was the whole setup. They weren't taking this properly, and I can remember being shocked by it. I couldn't understand what was going on. And Corbyn again has said, this isn't a serious, or rather, this is a problem. I'm very sorry that for people who've suffered from it, and I'm not a racist, I'm not an anti-Semite, but it's exaggerated. And the moment he goes, it's exaggerated, he screws up the message that Keir Starmer was desperate to do. So I think
didn't the report, sorry to interrupt, didn't the report also find that his own, meaning Corbyn's own office, was intervening to squash independent investigations into allegations of anti-Semitism? So he was
more than
weighting the
20,
scale. Yeah,
more than 20 times.
yeah. So this actually was an indictment, not just of the kind of intellectual and moral climate created by his leadership, but an indictment of his own leadership itself,
Yes.
as being corrupt or tendentious.
I know quite a few cynical members of this great movement of ours, by the way, which I've joined. I'm now a member of the Labour Party.
Congratulations.
I joined it after Corbyn lost the election.
I mean, you quit it after he lost the election.
No, I was because I was a BBC reporter.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I couldn't join a political party, or it felt wrong for me to do my job and be a member of the political party while I was at the BBC. The moment I left the BBC in October last year, I joined the Liberals and was happy for what the Liberals were doing in terms of trying to keep Britain in Europe, until they became silly. And under Jo Swinson, who was a disastrous leader, she led the party to say, let's have an election quickly. And we could all see it was going to be a disaster. It was a disaster. It was a very foolish tactical move. And after that, the moment Jeremy Corbyn lost the election, I quit the Liberals and joined the Labour Party. All I'm looking for is some kind of mechanism that stands for democracy, the rule of law, and some sense of social justice. Without,
well, aren't we all, sweetheart? I mean, that's nice work if you can get it these days. I will say though, I woke up this morning with a bad headache, probably a hangover, but whatever. That's just Thursday. And my 90-minute morning routine, getting the kid to school, walking the dog, getting caffeinated, it's all a mad rush. It's like a fire drill. And I was prepared. I was confirmed in having a bad mood all day. And then I saw this. And I'm now beginning to think that maybe 2020 will have proven to be, with all the carnage and all the atrocity and all the, demoralization from COVID and everything else, maybe the tail end of this thing will be like Superman flying so fast, reversing the rotation of the earth to save Lois Lane, kind of resetting the way things were, a status quo ante, which is all I want at this point. I'm not looking for forward progress. I'm looking for retrogression in my politics, wind it back about 5 years, maybe 6, and I think we'll be okay.
I go further back to Popeye finding his spinach, or Doctor Who finding his sonic screwdriver and managing to sort of like to pop the lid of a Dalek, take out the brain of Morbius, and then eat it for the rather revolting egg omelette it might be. But yes, it does fit. Anyway, for me,
Americans who are not into Doctor Who are going to be so confused by that, and not just as a description of a science fiction episode, but just as an allegory. That's the worst fucking allegory I've ever heard applied to a political situation. Your Popeye one was better.
By the way, it's allegory, but let's not do pronunciation.
Say aluminum, John. Say aluminum. Go ahead.
You mean the kind of
get me all riled up,
which is called aluminium? Yes. So I feel that you may well be right. I feel that this is an important moment. Just looked at some immediate polling, and all political sectors think this is a good thing. Labour Party members think Corbyn's done the right thing. 46% think it's a good thing, and something like 20-something% think it's a bad thing. That's in the Labour Party, but the general public think it's a good thing. Conservative Party members think it's a good thing. People who voted Remain think it's a good thing. People who voted Leave think it's a very good thing. So essentially, what now, obviously, because of the organisational grip the left has had recently on the Labour Party, there's a lot of trouble there. But it's an act of real courage, and it's reminiscent. It's a Kinnock moment, when Kinnock turned on Militant and said, this obscene folly of a Labour council scuttling around the city handing out redundancy notices by taxi. I remember it 1985, 1984, whenever it was a heroic moment where a sensible Labour leader was turning on the fruitcakes and the Stalinists and saying, enough already.
Yeah.
This is Keir's moment. I think he had no choice. But what it's showing is that this is a clear red line between him and the Corbyn era, and he's saying we're not putting up with this. And
it's also, what is relevant of as well is something else I've noticed in the last few years, and political fortunes being what they are now. When you ignore Twitter, when you cease to treat the sort of madding crowd of social media as its own constituency, and you just kind of plug away using common sense, basic, liberal morality on things, you're rewarded for it politically. I mean, Joe Biden had a zombified campaigner, so it seemed to all outward appearances. He wasn't engaging with the kind of online crowds, and it turned out that was the biggest virtue of his whole campaign. He just drowned out the noise online. And now, bizarrely, paradoxically, online has become his biggest platform without him even doing anything or saying much or intervening. It's gone from being an anti-Trump campaign into becoming a pro-Biden one, which is actually something I didn't even see transpiring, but so it has.
Yeah. Have you just seen? I mean, he's just started reading out a poem by Seamus Heaney, and it's completely beautiful, and his delivery is beautiful. I mean, this is the last call is a place where we can speak true to or rather we can say what we damn well please because no one's listening. But I absolutely believe that Joe Biden is a good candidate for now against the orange wrecking ball. He's a good candidate partly because he's Gaga granddad who can't remember the keys. I'm about to become a granddad, so I'm very sympathetic to this particular category. But also, he's fundamentally a decent and kind man who's had to put up with an awful tragedy in his life. He lost his wife and his daughter and two little boys. He had to look after them on their own. And one turned out to be good, one turned out to be less so good. That would be Hunter Biden, obviously.
Yep.
But nevertheless, there's his interactions with people, and you just see it again and again and again. He's sweet and good with people. So
look, I own my own folly. I thought he would be a very bad candidate, and I've said to you before on the show, like, I was really worried in a debate setting how easily discombobulated he might be when Trump started to do his sort of human wrecking ball routine. But instead, Trump, I think he overcompensated, and that first debate was so disastrous. And I mean, Biden had some churlish moments, but he didn't lose anything for it because Trump just, I mean, he was a toddler, he was a petulant child screaming into the microphone at every opportunity. And even the second debate, Trump's performance for Trump was better, a little more poised, such as it can be for him. But it didn't make the slightest difference, didn't make a dent.
What was beautiful about the first debate, and we should have done one of these things after the first debate, we were silly not to, my fault. After the first debate, the moment I thought, wow, was when he said, "Will you shut up, man?"
Yeah.
And I just thought, not only was that, it was kind of, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, it was like me losing it with the Church of Scientology. It was a moment of kind of lack of grace, of ill, a bit of a flash of temper, which actually everybody in the audience agreed with.
Yeah. And
the idea that Joe was sleepy and then sleepy Joe, no, it doesn't stick. One of my I'm going to try and remember the name of it. One of my favorite movies is what's it called? It's a detective movie with a guy called Art Carney, who's the actor, and he limps. and he's an old guy, and there's he's an old private eye, an old school private eye, and it's something like Lily Tomlin or somebody like that who's the actress, and somebody's murdered, and she gets this old guy, and she's, you know, you're really kind of old, and you don't understand what modern life is, but the old guy turns out to be okay and brave, and the last. I'll if I look it up, we'll lose flow, but it's a lovely movie. I can find it on Twitter, and I'll make the point on Twitter. But it's a lovely movie. But there's something about Joe, his decency, the stuttering thing, right? I used to stutter when I was a kid a little. I still say too much too often, which is bad in a professional broadcaster. But never mind. But the way that Joe stuttered was dreadful, and that kid from wherever he is, the 12-year-old, the 13-year-old, who said the things, the courage of that boy, and the way that the boy clearly loves Joe Biden because he's reached out to him and helped him. It's wonderful. And there's also Joe with a little black kid giving him a badge. And there's a series of these things again and again and again and again and again, and you feel there is something good about Joe. So I've got lots of mates, some of my closest American friends, weirdly, I've met and got a little place in Italy, and I go there to eat well, which is you've got to do if you're British. And I voted Remain, you'll be surprised to hear. But all of my American friends are saying they didn't want Joe. Joe's boring and old and too right wing, and they wanted all the other people. No, silly. In politics, it's not about the best, what you really want. It's about the least bad. Joe Biden was the least bad candidate in terms of defeating Trump, but actually he's risen somehow. And
well, I think it's the timing, right? I mean, it's the virtue of perpetual unsuccess. This is a guy who's been running for president for 40 years and failing quite quickly and quite severely in the primaries. And nobody thought he would ever be the guy, right? And he wouldn't have been. And he's even said he had no intention of running for president until Charlottesville, and then Trump's response to that. And he felt kind of the reluctant retiree coming back in for just one last job, so to speak. And
it's Hollywood. It's Hollywood.
It is Hollywood. And yeah, the tragedy stuff. I mean, you know, everybody kind of knew about his kids and or his wife and his daughter, and then obviously Beau. But that was made even more poignant because so many people have lost loved ones in the last 7 months. And yeah, it just, there was something very zeitgeisty about this guy. Yeah. And you know,
it feels to me that Superman, or rather the Nietzschean sense of Superman, the Ubermensch, not the Superman and with his underpants over his trousers, but the Nietzschean Superman, which is Trump, because Trump gets the virus and then he conquers the virus in a matter of days, and then there he is landing in his helicopter. It's the wrong tone. It's actually the wrong way to go.
I think though, you know, subconsciously, Americans have gone from, you know, this messianic figure in Barack Obama, and I always found it very cringe the way he was treated as a candidate, and then also over celebrated and lionized as president. I had huge problems with his foreign policy, and you know, he's made of damp clay, as are we all, and certainly a politician must be held to account and scrutinized. And then you had this kind of anomalous, nightmarish, buffoon presidency, which I think a lot of people, perhaps not enough, but certainly a slender majority, feel, right, okay, so we went from, you know, the sort of the falsely glorified or, you know, sort of gauzily rendered superhero figure into the supervillain. And now maybe all we need is just kind of like a bit of a hack, you know, somebody who's just like, okay, yeah, you know, oh, him, yeah, yeah, sure, why not?
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's anticlimactic, but it's anticlimactic in a good way, you know. So much has been undone over the last few years. People just want, like I said, they want to just reset. They want to turn back the clock, but not in a reactionary way, in simply a temporal way. And so, you know, Uncle Joe or Grandpa Joe, I mean, that's a way to do that. I do think there is something a bit Freudian about all this, and something I did not appreciate at all. And I was too fatalistic. And hey, I mean, I'm saying all this, we got how many days to go? There's always a chance Trump could steal it again, win it again, rather. But I am feeling a bit more confident and optimistic. And I know you've got a vested financial interest in this.
Yes, which I ought to explain in that in March I put in a 500 quid bet on Trump to win, which I was going to spend on my red wine habit, Italian red wine habit, and then Sweeney Family News. I'm going to be a grandfather. Baby Shyla is in her my son's wife's because they got married. In a shotgun wedding. Anyway, there is this unborn baby who will benefit from my winnings, £1,250. If Joe wins, if Trump wins, she will get nothing. And so I know. So my unborn granddaughter is going, come on, Joe, come on, Joe. So do you think
your emotive, smarmy appeal to vote for Biden to protect the fortunes of your own? By the way, just on the point of,
I've been.
Hang on, no. I wanted to pay you a backhanded compliment because you mentioned your vino habit, and I got a message on Facebook because I put up the first episode of our series finale from Andrei Soldatov, our mutual friend.
Yes.
Who's now in London, and he said, actually, it was quite funny on two levels. First, he said, Michael, I didn't realize you started a podcast with John Sweeney. I said, we did it in March, Andre, but you know, thanks for paying attention. Then he said, more relevant, that he was out drinking with you or went to yours last week and got blind staggeringly drunk. And he said, Sweeney sure can drink. And I said, you realize this is a Russian talking about an Englishman's habit. He said, yeah, I know. So, I mean, congratulations, molodets, as they would say. I mean, you have officially drunk a Russian under the table.
I've done it with the police in Perm. I had a Scottish producer who can actually drink more than I can, and me, and we were doing a story about vodka bootleg guys who were selling hand sanitizer, which actually killed about 1,000 people and turned about 10,000 kids yellow. Putin bumped up the price of vodka threefold, and the mafia got into hand sanitizer, which they were selling on the street as a kind of substitute vodka. But the problem is that you've got to put in a colorant, and the colorant plus the particular formula of the hand sanitizer, which should be kind of neat alcohol, but it wasn't quite because of the colorant, and it was a killer. It was an effective poison. Anyway, we ended up in Perm, which is got the western edge of Russia, and we met the local cops. Let's all go for a drink, and their goal was to drink us under the table, and we were good. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, the last Russian detective left, leaving me and the Scottish guy surrounded with a sea of empty vodka bottles. And actually, when I got back to the hotel, I threw up over the hotel steps, and I was out of action for 3 days, but we beat them.
And that video of you vomiting on the hotel steps is more sought after now than Donald Trump's TV tape at the Ritz.
Well, I think, what are they going to say? Are they going to shame me? They're going to say I drink too much? Well, hello. But I do.
You wear your compromise on your sleeve. I like that.
Yeah. Because if you do, then they can't. It's not compromise. It's just, I love a drink.
Sweeney being Sweeney.
I do hope none of my enemies, of which there are a few, are not watching this, but no one is, so it's okay. Do you think? So here, my anxiety. I'm confident that Joe is doing very well, and his supporters, too many Trump supporters can see there's a problem with Trump. He's got the virus wrong, and there's something wrong with his temper. And therefore, he's going to lose, and therefore they're not going to turn out. While the young and black people, women, people who've been to university are going to turn out for Joe in spades. Absolutely.
I don't know about that. I mean, I maintain, I think, as of today, Biden will win, but don't underestimate how easily galvanized the Trump base is. You know, we're seeing like a third of likely voters will have voted already in early voting, but of that number, how many went for Trump? So he has capitalized, as I said yesterday, he's capitalized on the culture war, not to the extent I think he would have liked to. He hasn't really managed to turn this Twitter scuppering of disinformation, or shall we say, dubiously sourced misinformation on Biden and his son into more of a political rallying cry. I mean, it registers with hardcore Trump supporters and a few useful idiots on the hard left who are effectively Trump supporters, even though they don't admit it. But it hasn't really penetrated the mainstream.
Yeah, and the thing with who's the idiots? Tucker, somebody, Mr. Tucker.
Oh, I love that bit, don't you? Yeah, we're now at a stage in the collapse of Western epistemology where people are going on telly and saying the dog ate my disinformation, and then claiming that itself is damning. That's the indictment right there.
What's fucking?
It's like Geraldo. It's like Geraldo telling you in advance there's nothing in Houdini's or in Al Capone's safe, and then you staying on air watching him open it for it to be completely fucking empty. That's where we are, and people are lapping this up though. He wouldn't have done that unless he knew that at least a sizable chunk of his viewers will have been like, aha, the deep state strikes again. Now they're in the postal service. Now they're stealing Tucker's big scoop.
It reminded me, so we can explain to listeners what's going on precisely, is that there is a series of embarrassing evidence about Hunter Biden from his laptop, and Tucker's got
supposedly from the laptop, right? And we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, and anyway, that's the allegation. Tucker's got it, and then it's posted, and it disappears in the post, and no one makes a copy. Now, I've got an Italian teacher who, and the problem with me is I'd rather be running novels in English when I'm in Italy and drinking fine wine, lovely wine, and eating in nice bars and hanging out. And what I keep on not doing is doing my Italian irregular verbs. And I've become more and more fanciful in my explanations why I'm not doing my homework to my frankly beautiful Italian teacher. And the last time, I haven't been to Italy for, well, I was last there in August, but my last explanation as why I hadn't done my irregular verb homework was that a alien spaceship landed, and the alien probe entered my brain, and they sucked out all my knowledge of Italian irregular verbs, which is why I couldn't do the homework. That excuse was actually better than Tucker's excuse as to where all of the compromat on Hunter Biden had gone.
I was going to say, if you wanted to make up with the Church of Scientology, you should tell them that excuse, and they'll probably rate you, what is it, like your thetans or whatever the hell they call it, engrams. They'll probably elevate you to, I don't know what it is, like captain of the Starship Enterprise. You know how they have those tiers of Scientologists.
I thank you for the suggestion. I think that I know that I am a suppressive person in Scientology, in the world of Scientology, and although you're,
wait, who are you suppressing though? It has to be somebody in your inner circle, right? Your family member, or friend.
Although your suggestion is useful, I think I'm probably not going to be able to repair my relationships with the church in this lifetime.
Just endorse that check that you get from the Biden bet, and all is forgiven.
I have, would not, haven't been offered and wouldn't take a penny, but I am an admirer of Joe's humanity. Now, the thing I'm worried about, on behalf of my unborn granddaughter, etc., is how will Trump play it really rough? Will he look at the returns on the day and declare that he's a winner, or will he? But there's a danger of him doing that so much that he could end up in prison because.
Yeah, look, I think if it's a blowout, if it's a landslide, and Biden wins by 80 electoral votes or something, plus the popular vote, I don't think he's got much of a maneuver. If it's close and it comes down to, say, shall we count the mail-in ballots that arrived after Election Day but were postmarked by Election Day, all this stuff, and it goes to the Supreme Court, then we're in for a long, hard slog, and a constitutional crisis perhaps. But I mean, look, there was a good piece in The Atlantic a few weeks ago spelling out in granular detail, given the constitutional process by which an election is determined and certified, all of the ways Trump and William Barr and his attorneys could screw this up or try to drag it out and effectively declare himself still president. For some reason, I don't see it. I could be wrong, maybe. It just doesn't seem like that will be the outcome. I think what'll happen is, if he has been defeated, and defeated categorically, unambiguously, where, before 2:00 in the morning, night of, we know who won the election. I think there's going to be kind of an intervention in the White House. He's going to be ranting, thundering and grumbling, ranting and raving, tweeting, stolen election, and all the rest of it. But I do think that the institution of American democracy is going to basically force him out. Now, are there 1,001 ways, I guess, in which that's not going to happen or would not be possible? Sure, yes. Something in me tells me he almost acts as though he knows he's already lost. He almost acts as if he's a defeated president or a one-term president. I think he is gearing up for the inevitable civil crisis that follows. I mean, he will, in his own mind, he has to convince himself that whatever happens, he won. Yep. And he has to convince his fanatical base of supporters, whatever happened, he won. This will lead to probably acts of violence. This will lead to, crazed militiamen in Michigan probably marching up to the state capitol and packing heat and doing all the stuff that's frankly happened already. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Secret Service, if he's no longer duly elected serving president, they're going to evict this guy. I mean, they're going to throw him out of the White House, I don't see, and even frankly, I mean, the latest Supreme Court appointee, Amy Coney Barrett, even the judges that Trump has put on the court, I mean, there's only so much they can do to try and steer things his way. These are not people who will have got as far as they did in their legal careers, essentially treating the Constitution as scrap paper, right? I mean, they have to take it seriously to some degree. So again, I'm hoping that it is a landslide. I'm hoping it is a blowout. I'm hoping that he knows very, very early on, very quickly, that he's lost this thing. And he should lose it at both levels, popular and electoral. So that makes it more definitive. If he pulls the popular but loses the electoral, which is very, very unlikely, he's going to use that argument. Ironically, what he said Hillary couldn't use in 2016. But if he loses the electoral, or he wins the electoral but loses the popular again, it depends by how much. Look, you can hear me kind of rambling and sort of being very indecisive in my thinking here, because I don't logically know the answer. I just have a gut feeling it's going to be okay.
Yes.
And that's rare for me, as you know.
I feel that I think you're right. I think intuitively you can smell the sense of defeat.
Yeah.
And the way that Trump is addressing his cult is, I'm never coming back to fill in Nowheresville in the flyover states. I'm never going to come back here. if you vote against me. But and it's kind of like, I don't want to be here anyway. And you feel that the joy of the hunt has gone from him, and there isn't, he knows that it's not working, and the people around him know that it's not working, and the Hunter Biden nonsense is evidence of the fact, and it feels like that's their last trick. It doesn't really work. It doesn't stick on Joe.
I think he also, like, to some weird degree, or at his core, whatever that is made of, I think he understands he'll probably be happier as an ex-president, because he can do and say and carry on without the fears of
he doesn't.
checks and balances. He'll make a fortune, right? He'll probably launch a media empire of his own to rival Rupert Murdoch, who we can't stand anymore, because Fox News is not turned fully against him, but it hasn't been as labor.
That's fascinating. I was talking to a guy, an English lord. I need to check with him where I can talk about him, but I'll do that. But he was saying, I think it was him who was saying that, somebody else maybe, but Fox is not supporting Trump with the same kind of willful power that it did before. And Rupert apparently has been telling friends he thinks that Trump's finished.
Yeah.
And you can feel that in the way that Fox's coverage is being run. And so there are even inside Fox, there are journalists who are saying, well, hello, there are just too many people who aren't buying Trump on COVID, for example.
And I think if you're at Fox, or you're the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, frankly, even if you're the New York Post, which is the only newspaper I think I've seen that's endorsed him, you're oddly looking forward to a post-Trump era, because you thrive in opposition, right?
Yeah.
One thing to have to defend the indefensible. That puts you in a very awkward spot. There's only so much bad faith a human being can espouse and mouth before he begins to lose his mind, or operate at a level he himself feels is a bit too low. But when you're on the defense, when you're sort of pushing back against the status quo, for instance, they won't have to keep banging on about the deep state anymore. Now it will just be the state. It's more convenient, isn't it? It's just easier. It's like, oh, hang on, we sound a bit mad, like a homeless man barking at cars when we talk about the deep state, don't we, boys? Oh, yeah, I guess we do. Well, what if we just talk about big government again? Fucking hell, that's what we've been waiting for the whole time, Take it back to the superficial, and they'll just be happier. They'll be funnier, too. They'll be more interesting to read. I used to enjoy reading P.J. O'Rourke as a political.
I met him, and I did.
But he always was funnier, and I thought more intelligent in his analysis and his writing when Republicans were in the opposition.
Yeah.
Power, it was a bit weird,
Yes.
He wasn't by no means a kind of unthinking acolyte. I mean, he criticized Reagan's foreign policy. He was a foreign, but there's something just a bit off, the timbre of the stuff.
So I had where's he sit on Trump, PJ?
He's anti-Trump. I mean, PJ is a libertarian. I find him fascinating. I have to be honest. I think he's lost step comedically. I haven't laughed very much at his stuff, but Parliament of Whores, Holidays in Hell, those were great, especially if you're a foreign correspondent. I mean, those were really funny books.
I met him when I was at the Observer in the 90s, and we went out on the piss together, and it was a big old night. It wasn't quite as bad as the Russian detectives, but it was a bad night, by which I mean it was a great night. But I can remember before when we were only a couple of bottles in, I said, so Reagan was in his pomp, and I said, well, so Reagan's a moron. And he said, yeah, well, he's maybe, but here's the thing. Reagan understands the difference between banning the fax machine and The internet didn't exist then, but banning the fax machine and the photocopier and the typewriter, and the Soviet state, which does seek to suppress those things. Reagan gets that. Reagan gets the moment where he says, Mr. Gorbachev, turn down this wall. And much as I disliked the Republican right and many of the things that Reagan and the Reagan administration were doing around the world, I understood and agreed with that fundamental point.
Yeah.
And there's been no time. Oh, also, the other thing is that I actually, as a human being, I greatly admire John McCain. And when John McCain had a go at Biden and the comedy thing organized by the Catholic Cardinal in New York, where we referred to it, yes, you referred to it yesterday. But actually, McCain is, I mean, Obama was very, very good, but McCain was very good too. And he took the piss out of Obama. He also said, Obama is a good man, and I honor him as an enemy, as a rival, as somebody I'm fighting against, which was a very, very decent thing to do. But then he said, but I'm behind, you're ahead. So if you say anything wrong here, Senator Obama, you may lose. No pressure. So what
a Republican internationalist who, I mean, look, there's a very good book by Matt Welch, speaking of libertarians, Reason magazine editor, called The Myth of the Maverick, which kind of picks apart the sort of the fable of John McCain, if you like. Did so a while back when he was still around and in good fighting form. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and this is, I think, anybody who studies politics or who practices journalism has to have a sense of proportion. So you can be against Reagan and a host of issues, particularly social policies, economic policies, but understand that there's a kind of a pith of insight into world history that can't really be reduced to a caricature or can't really be so easily dismissed, because it is correct. There is nothing wrong. In fact, there is much to recommend in being anti-totalitarian. Now, the problem is the excesses of that lead you to, for instance, say, propping up military juntas in Latin America and death squads and all sorts of awful elements and factions that, on the mere tenet of anti-communism, commit atrocities and undermine the very values you claim to be promulgating. But yeah, no, and with McCain, I mean, I will tell you, I mean, I traveled in Europe a lot, both before Trump's election and afterward. And frankly, actually during the Obama years, when there were a lot of, particularly, I always joke, the contemporary landscape of the continent, the farther east you go, the more west you go, particularly when you start to get to, Ukraine and, well, what was Poland under the current leadership, the Baltic states, though, especially. And there was a real sense of missed opportunity with the McCain presidency, because this is a guy who believed in Europe whole and free. This is a guy who absolutely believed in NATO, and somebody for whom the inviolability of Article 5 didn't need to be deliberated upon. It was almost a gut instinct, right? So that aspect of the Republican Party has gone. And it's not because necessarily, like, I look at a guy like Rubio, who, and I see just a chancer. I just see an opportunist and somebody who kind of talked an okay game at the start, but has now bent the knee for Trumpism, for his own self-serving political instincts, and looking down the path of his own presidential run again or whatever. And with McCain, it was never really about that. This was a guy who was willing to blow up his own spot on a matter of principle and a matter of morality. And when he didn't do it, you could even see it was manifest in almost his mien, that he was so deeply, deeply uncomfortable with the dirty and pragmatic side of politics, which is why, in a sense, it's almost a testament to his legacy that he never quite made it to the top spot. Like I say, the virtue of unsuccess. And so he and Biden actually do have a lot in common, and they were great friends. They got on very well.
And they were friends, but I also feel I'm going to make one more compliment, which is a little weird, but I 1990, 1989, 1980. I went to, I think, the Bournemouth Party conference for the Conservatives when I was at the Observer, and Mrs. T was in power. And I got into the, there was a young Tory event, and Mrs. T was there, and it was late, and I'd had too much to drink. And I started booing Mrs. Thatcher's speech amongst about 200 of the purest young Conservatives you could find in Britain at that moment. And she stopped dead and said, "Who's booing me?" And I was, being an honest man, I put up my hand and I said, "It's me." And she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm from the Observer," bad newspaper, obviously. And she came and sort of, she had a wrapped up newspaper or wrapped up speech, and she tapped me lightly over the shoulder, but she didn't beat me on the buttocks as she did to Christopher Hitchens, but there was a bit of that. And what was funny and good about the moment was that I was in the wrong, because as a reporter, I shouldn't heckle a bloody prime minister doing that thing. But also she was funny about dealing with it. And I liked her sense of proportion. And much as I disagreed passionately with so many of the things that she did to our country, in terms of understanding free speech and things like that, she was good, as was McCain, as was Reagan. Trump, nothing. The
Well, let me
way
ask you
he turns on the press, the way he turns on
old grizzled lefty hack that you are. Old grizzled lefty hack that you are. When you were rebuked by Lady T, did you find that she, as Hitchens put it, reeked of sex? Because that was his startling revelation.
I did. It wasn't.
See, this is the dark secret of contemporary. It really is. All of you socialists, like reporters who hated on her so much, you just all wanted to take it to bed, didn't you? And that's why I never, the Austin Powers joke, he's trying to like have his cock crinkling moment and he thinks of Margaret Thatcher naked on a cold day. That just to me was the least funny joke in Austin Powers.
I get
every Brit of your age and more or less political orientation, shall we say, has always very quietly, sotto voce, there was something about Maggie.
The serious point I was trying to make, let's move on.
And that's why, and I just want to finalize that thought, because I'm a tremendous fan of the actress Gillian Anderson.
Yeah.
I won't go into too much detail, but I was a bigger fan of her when I was about 14 years old.
Yeah.
And now she's playing Lady T in The Crown. And I think that is inspired casting on so many levels.
Yes, because fundamentally, she's sexy.
She is.
No, I don't think, but there was a moment. So I remember this moment where Mrs. T takes the piss out of me, and she does tap me in some way with a kind of guilty schoolboy. And it's only because no one's listening, but I'm actually talking about it. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is it's proper for people like me and you to be open and honest about there are times when politicians you disagree with fundamentally about almost everything, you can see their quality. And I just don't have this with Trump. I don't think there's never been a moment that Trump said something and I thought, oh, good on you. And that's absolutely true in the case of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, John McCain. George W. Bush, have I told you this story in 2000?
No.
It was a place, Clinton, Ohio. I went there, the Observer sent me, George W. is going to Clinton, Ohio. So there was a kind of weird kind of thing. So off you go. And it was in the middle of fucking nowhere, in the middle of fucking nowhere. Have you been to Ohio? Anyway, never mind.
Yeah, I drove through Ohio twice.
It's like, well, anyway, and also the other thing that people from there did tremendous things fighting the Nazis in the Second World War. It's full of good people, but nevertheless, it's a bit, it's back of beyond nowheresville. Find this place, tiny hall. There's George W. And there is a transgender person who was a man and is now a woman, and who's got a deep voice, and she's wearing a floral dress, but she's sitting down. And George W. says, points to her hand, and she puts the question, but her voice is deep. And he says, sir, and she says, I'm mom, actually. And George W. goes, I'm terribly sorry, I got that wrong. And at that moment was very, very gracious to this woman in a way which I found as a human being admirable.
Yeah.
And I really, really had to go at George W. And obviously he was wrong about Iraq, though, lots of complicated thoughts about that. But as a human being, he was in that particular moment, and it was a minor crisis. He handled it way better than I would have done if I'd been there doing what he was doing.
I think it's very clear to me that both he and his wife Laura, who, as a librarian and an avid reader, I remember Hitchens used to tell this story all the time, although perhaps to romanticize or glamorize the first family as a way of apologizing for the Iraq War. But he used to remark, this is somebody who, when given the option of who to invite for state dinners at the White House, would invariably choose Tom Stoppard, Ian McEwan. And having spent a lot of time in Austin, Texas, she, I believe, when he was governor, created the Austin Literary Festival, which I don't know if you've been, but I've been to a lot of literary festivals. This is probably the best one in the world, not certainly in the top 5 that I've been to. Austin is a very cosmopolitan, liberal city of Texas. A lot of fun. But anyway, I say this because I do think that on social issues, W was more to the left than he let on. So for instance, gay marriage, I think he was probably okay with, but he felt he simply could not abandon that party political platform for fear of losing everything. But yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And, were it not, what else happened at the theater, Mrs. Lincoln? But I was going to say, were it not for Iraq, on foreign policy, he probably would be best remembered for PEPFAR, which saved the lives of, possibly millions of Africans who were affected with, or afflicted, I should say, with HIV. You go to certain African countries and they think George W. Bush is a hero for what the US did for them. But again, this gets subsumed by the more pressing world historical issues. But anyway, yeah, I see what you mean. You try to, as a journalist, and this is the difficult thing, particularly now in the age of social media, how do you walk the line of being skeptical, being critical, being almost fault-finding, but also seeing the humanity or seeing the decency or giving the devil his dues, yeah? So one of my favorite journalists, Murray Kempton, who is this old, sort of had a patrician air about him, but was kind of the furthest thing from it. A liberal columnist, I think, for Newsday. And he would ride a bicycle, Larkin-esque characteristics, smoked a pipe, very witty, very worldly. And if anybody was down and out or anybody was being vilified, he would try to rush to their defense and try to give them the best, portray them in the best possible light. Now that's a noble instinct. You can go too far with it, of course. You can be contrarian for its own sake, but it is a noble instinct. I remember he was a fierce critic of Mario Cuomo. He would attack Democratic governor of New York from the left. And at one point, I think Cuomo asked him, he's like, gee, Murray, what the hell do I have to do to get a favorable line from you? And Murray Kempton's response was, "Have you tried being indicted, Governor?"
Yeah,
You know, it's not a bad way to be, or at least to have that kind of
yes.
open-mindedness about people. Yeah.
I don't, but I think with both, all three examples I've given, I think there were a couple of sentences where I would reflect those things. McCain's different because I never really wrote about him and I wasn't or reported on him. But certainly with Reagan, Thatcher, and George W., I was pretty rude about them in print, and then I had a couple of sentences to lay off. And actually, my feelings towards them were more complicated. And I also understood in some way that Britain under Mrs. Thatcher and America under George W. and Reagan were not awful places. The regime, I was angry and upset about what they were doing, but I didn't think that this was getting close to Russia in a way that I do that under Trump. If Trump gets 4 more years, you know, I'm really scared about the West, about the future of democracy, the rule of law, all that stuff. I don't think it's going to happen. Listen, we've been boring our free listeners for too long. So you've been listening to the, how are we phrasing this? This is the last,
I think it's, yeah, the series finale.
It's a series. This is the last call of the last call.
Right.
And actually, I find it's weirdly therapeutic to.
That was what, you know, we should tell people, we did not start this as a money-making venture. We started this because I was in lockdown with wife and child and dog. And much as I love them, there's only so many Disney show tunes I can withstand within the course of a day before I start to lose my marbles. So I needed to talk to somebody who was as dyspeptic and sort of despairing of the world as I was. And I thought of no better. By the way, we should tell people, John and I have only met face to face once. It was in London, and I don't remember much of the evening. I don't think John does either. But I remember we got on.
It was a fancy bar. It was a fancy bar somewhere.
It was, what's that club called? I used to be a member there, and then it shut down.
Anyway, it was a fancy bar.
Yeah.
It was the kind of place where if you ordered a proper drink, it would come with a kind of a bit of a grapefruit in it or something like that. But it was that kind of place. Anyway, I just like old men's pubs. But never. Yes, that's true. We barely know each other, but this is an alcoholic version of the special relationship.
I think that relationship was pretty much solidified in alcoholism, by the way. I'm going to check tape on that, but.
So you've been listening to The Last Call. See you tomorrow.
Bye.